speech-language pathology and has become a core specialist in Mnri. She's part of the Mnri International Team of Professionals, where she works with children and adults suffering from neurological delays, trauma, and brain insults. She'll be speaking to us about reflex integration. Our family learned about reflex integration from whom else? A Taca mom. It fell into the category of can't harm, might help. And so that is usually our calling card of let's look into this. We found it to be very calming, very helpful, and also the people that we worked with gave us a path to follow. You start here, here's where you work toward. I liked how they approached our family. Dr. Light is certified by the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association. She's also a member of the American Academy of Audiology, the Florida Language, Speech, Hearing Association, and the Florida Academy of Audiology. Please help me welcome Dr. Light.
I was just told I'm a little soft-spoken, so I'm hoping that you all can hear me. Is this okay? Happy? Okay. It is such a pleasure to be here on behalf of Taca, on behalf of Mnri, and this is my first exposure to Taca, so I'm so glad to meet all of you and learn more about the organization. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Svetlana Maskotova in 2004 on my quest for trying to help children that had auditory processing problems. And a lot of people say to me, what are you doing? And you're doing what? You're touching children, you're an audiologist, you're not supposed to be doing that. That's not what audiologists do. That's not what we think about when we are thinking about auditory processing problems, and probably that's the last thing that we're thinking about when we're working with children with auditory processing disorders. But for me, it was just so important as I was looking at these children that, I have a background in special education, and my master's and doctorate are in audiology, so I sort of kind of came full circle in working with children with auditory processing problems. And so many children that have autism or on the autistic spectrum are going to have auditory processing issues as a component of what's going on. But I was doing my usual stuff, everything that was in the textbook that day that said, you got to do aerobics, and you just need to do fast forward, and you need to do all these wonderful programs, and I did those programs. And they are wonderful for the right problem at the right time, and I think that's something that's really important. When do you do what? And I kept thinking, parents were calling me up saying, yeah, we made some progress, but we seem to have regressed. I don't really know that we're seeing anything. How come this isn't working? And I kept searching for answers, and I was calling professors from all around the country that I had studied with and said, what do I do with these kids? And they said, I said, so many of the children that I see, they don't just have auditory processing problems. They have motor issues. They have eye tracking problems. They have handwriting problems. This is a bigger ball of wax than what we really think it is. It's not just this little auditory processing problem. In fact, I rarely ever see a child that has what I call a vanilla auditory processing problem. There's usually so many other things going on. So I said, what do you think this is? And they said, well, those are comorbid conditions. And I said, well, comorbid, so what does that mean? Well, they just happen to exist at the same time this auditory processing problem is going on, and one thing has nothing to do with the other, that just happen to be there at the same time. And I thought, impossible, impossible, because I see so many children that are having these issues, and I kept thinking, I'm too high. I'm aiming too high. There's something that comes before this. What is it? And I kept peeling back the layers of the onion, trying this and trying that. I have been to clinics all over the country, studying different methods of sensory integration. Usually I'm the lone audiologist in the room raising my hand when they say, is there any other professional here in the room? It's like, audiology? But it's just so important because our auditory system is so integrated and interrelated into everything else. And the auditory system is really the only system that is completely myelinated at birth and in its adult size ready to go. So that tells you something. There's a reason why the system is so fired up and ready to go from the moment that a child is born. It's got to be pretty important in terms of our development. And I kept thinking to myself, but nobody's talking about these motor problems, these vestibular problems. We're all talking about the hearing and the processing, and we're all kind of stuck up here in our left temporal lobe. And I thought, I got to pay attention. I'm going to have to do something different. I'm going to have to go outside of my box and try to find a solution, some sort of an answer to these problems, because I know that these children just don't seem to have the foundation they need to hang these higher order learning skills. So I started taking some courses that had to do with brain gym, because I knew many of the children that I saw had trouble getting the two hemispheres of their brain to talk to each other. And we have that a lot in our autistic population, with many autistic children having smaller corpus callosums that connect the two hemispheres of the brain. But I know that there was something that came even before that corpus callosum. There was something happening at that brainstem level. And I was running some physiological tests where the child doesn't have to raise their hand or do anything, something called an acoustic reflex test, or an auditory evoked potential, or a brainstem test, which I was finding that there were some abnormalities in these tests that were showing me it really, brainstem, brainstem, brainstem. And all of our sensory information, or most of it, has to filter through that brainstem to go to the top of the brain for processing. In fact, our brains develop from the bottom to the top. And so I kept thinking, this is like an electrical circuit. That's what we are, chemical electrical beings. And we need to get enough electricity to the light bulb at the top. And we need a power source to drive that circuit. And so I had to think about, is it the power source? Do I have a hearing problem? Is there some other problem where there's just no juice? Is there an electrical problem? Or is there some sort of problem with my light bulb? Because if it's not the light bulb, I can change the light bulb all day long and it's not going to go off. I had to figure out where in the circuit, or maybe it was all three parts, that were having a problem. So I started at the top, as most of us do, where we're looking at, okay, what's the symptom? Here it is. We're going to go after that symptom. And we do a lot of that in the modern science world, where we're just looking at these symptoms and trying to band-aid them, but not really looking below the surface as to what is really driving this problem. And so in my quest for knowledge and through Brain Gym, I started to hear about Dr. Svetlana Maskatova, who is a psychologist and researcher originally from Russia. If any of you have had the pleasure of meeting her, she's really delightful, very humble, very approachable, and she really wants to save the world. She's a terrific lady. Sometimes it's a little hard to understand her because of her accent, and I'm proud to say that I now am fluent in Russian English. But she's a really delightful lady, very insightful, very intuitive, and I've really been blessed to know her because she has shared so much with me. So I'm happy today to be able to share some of this information with you. But the reflexes are really where I felt that we needed to begin. We needed to go all the way back to our origins, to our humble beginnings, and figure out what was happening at the bottom of at the foundation of our development. And as Dr. Van Dyke was saying before, the biochemistry is enormously important, and probably as we're talking about this hierarchy of what do we do first, we need to make sure that the biochemistry the biomedical part of this is under control, and that the child is comfortable and able to at least have those building blocks that they're going to need to even develop these reflexes and the other sequelae, that emerge from that. So what are primitive reflexes? In Maskatova world, where I am, we are getting away from the term primitive reflex, and we're referring to them as primary motor responses. Primary motor responses are these genetically coded behaviors that we have that serve as our primary motor system. And so it's really from the motor system that everything else evolves. You don't come out and say, "Hi, Mom, pass the cornflakes" as soon as you're born. You have to go through these developmental stages before you can ever get to that point. And we sort of gloss over that. We don't pay that much attention, but these are hugely important stages. These are automatic stereotypical movements, and these are directed from our brainstem without any cortical control. So our cortex is that big thinking area of the brain that helps us to plan and make decisions about things and so forth. But before we ever get there, we have these stereotypical movements that are also referred to as automatisms, because they happen automatically. When you get a tap on the side of the cheek and you're a newborn, you're going to start to root, hopefully. These are foundational movements, and they're subordinate, or they come before other types of mature reflexes that we refer to as lifelong reflexes or postural reflexes.